Joined now by Congressman Mark Green, Republican of Tennessee. He wants to bring companies back from China after all this mess. We're working on it before, but now there's a new urgency. We also have Gordon Chang, a well-known China expert and hawk. He is the author of the book, The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Welcome to you both. First, Congressman, we've wanted to get more companies to come back home from China for a long time, but there is a renewed urgency here. How do you make it happen?
Well, one of the things we have to do, because it's expensive, you think about what it takes to move a manufacturing plant from China to the United States, we have to help them. And one of the pieces of legislation that I've got right now would expense that move as a tax credit, basically, and we'd take that money from the tariff money that the president's collecting now. So it would basically offset the cost of the move as a tax credit, and hopefully that'll help them. Lots of other things too we can use to incentivize the businesses to come back, but that's one idea that I'm pushing forward right now.
We like it. It's good for business, and I want to ask you in a moment: does it hurt China? Because Gordon, I hate to be so blunt about it, but we want to do that because we have to retaliate. If we do not punish China after what they did and what they didn't do, we're asking for a repeat. Your thoughts, sir?
Oh, that's absolutely right. And the reason why we need to impose those costs on China is because we know with certainty that in a few years, there's going to be another virus or pathogen that escapes China. And it's going to be the same thing unless we make it clear to Chinese leaders that there's a cost for deliberately spreading bugs, which is what they did this time, because they knew that this was human-to-human transmissible. They wanted countries to keep their borders open. So this was malevolence on a scale that we've never seen before. Never before in history has one country attacked all other countries at once. So we've got to do something, as you point out.
By the way, China has been retaliating against all foreigners during this crisis. An fascinating story in the New York Times today. New York Times, a restaurant in northern China put up a banner celebrating the virus's spread in the United States. A widely circulated cartoon showed foreigners being sorted into trash bins. African residents in the southern city of Guangzhou have been corralled into forced quarantines labeled as dangers to the country's health. Gordon, I believe you've lived in China for a period of time. You spent a lot of time. This would never happen in America. And I think a lot of people here are shocked to know that this kind of thing can happen and does happen in China.
It can happen and does happen because the communist regime has a xenophobic ideology, and actually it's racist. We've seen, of course, what's happening in what the Chinese call Xinjiang, in the northwestern part of the country with the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs. But we got to remember that the ideology of China is essentially that the Chinese are unique. They didn't come out of Africa. They were separately developed. And they believe that everybody in the world owes allegiance to China and is a subject to China. This is very dangerous, this Han nationalism. And because we've seen indoctrination over the course of decades, that's why we have all of these really ugly incidents, including against Africans in Guangzhou, which happens periodically. Yeah. So this is no accident.
Congressman Green, I want to play this for you from Governor Cuomo, and he points out that China has actually benefited so far in this, to a point.
It is the cruelest irony that this nation is now dependent on China for production of many of these products. Many of these products in the normal marketplace were being produced in China. And now you have everyone shopping China for PPE, gowns, ventilators. The gowns, the gloves are not complicated components to manufacture.
It is kind of wild that at this point, Congressman, they seem to be benefiting. What you were talking about before, it sounds great. My question, have you calculated, will it hurt China Do you think we can inflict damage upon, and I'm talking about the government. I wish the very best for the people, but we do want, and I think it's sound policy, to have some sort of retaliation.
Yeah, I really appreciate your differentiation between the people and the communist leaders of that country. But yeah, I think it does. Anything that, hurts their economy destabilizes the leadership. So, we can actually do that by getting those companies out of China and bringing them back to the United States. And anything that helps our GDP, helps America. One of the great examples of this sort of economic warfare that's been going on, Motorola was a company worth about $17 billion in 1997. They went to do a deal in China, had to give their IP to Huawei. The government, funded Huawei to put Motorola out of business, and the company was scrapped. The cell towers division of that company was scrapped in 2011 for $900 million. That loss on the U.S. GDP was enormous. But that's how this war is being fought, and we have been losing.
As we have to wrap up, gentlemen, but Gordon, the military that China has gotten a lot better over the past several decades, very sophisticated. We have to keep that in mind as we calculate how we're going to respond. We don't want total war. And I don't think it's that type of situation, but we don't want war, a hot war with China.
Yes. And, the one thing about having our factories in China, having trade with China, we're enriching the regime. The regime is using the proceeds of our trade to develop its military. And so this is strategically terrible on the part of the United States that we are funding the adversary, which is designed and configuring itself to kill Americans.
Funding the adversary through trade. By the way, you would grade Donald Trump on trade and the negotiations, and how? What kind of grade would you give him, Gordon?
Well, I would prefer not to see a phase 2 trade deal. I hope that China buys the additional $200 billion worth of goods. But if it doesn't, I think that we need to put our tariffs back on under those Section 301 tariffs, because China is still stealing U.S. intellectual property to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. We've just got to stop that.
And it's wild. In this story, somehow the Trump administration has been portrayed as the villain. Have you noticed that, Congressman? Real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an article today about how Trump has fallen into the trap of Xi by taking money from the World Health Organization.
Oh.
So they're blaming Trump for defunding WHO, and WHO helped keep this thing a secret.
Yeah. No,
it's ridiculous.
Corruption there, all kinds of problems. Just because it has a pretty name, World Health Organization, who couldn't like it? You look at the fine print, they got a lot of problems. Congressman Gordon, thank you both very much to be